welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Tomorrow, July 4th, 2023, will be the 247th birthday of our country. And while most hopefully remember that this is the date that the Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence, I think it's worth reminding people what caused this break from England, which was a superpower at the time, especially since the results were by no means guaranteed, and in fact were highly unlikely. Declaring independence was the easy part. Making it a reality was the challenge. The founding generation was aware of this. We owe them a huge debt for their courage and sacrifice. Thank God they were successful. So what led them to risk their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor? Let's look at the long train of abuses listed in the Declaration of Independence. As I read through these, think about all the branches of our federal government today, from the president, the executive branch, the Congress, the courts, and all of the federal agencies. Do you see any similarities? We'll comment on some of these similarities that I see as we go through. I'm sure there are other parallels with our circumstances today. Whether they match exactly, they probably are having a similar effect on us. Consider all the armed federal agencies we have today that have been weaponized. You've got the IRS, the FBI, of course they've always had weapons, but you also have EPA, Department of Education, and other organizations. So keep those things in mind as we read through this long train of abuses. And when I first start off, it's going to be talking about the abuses by the king directly, and then it'll get into the abuses by the parliament and then back to the king. Now the abuses started really after 1763, which was following the French and Indian War, which many of the colonists took part in as British subjects against the French and Indians. Prior to that, Britain had pretty much had a hands-off approach to the colonies, kind of let them do their own thing within reason. But after the war, England had a huge debt, and they needed financial help. And so that's when a lot of the problems started. But keep in mind that they went from having a free hand to really being subjects once this thing got started. And this happened over a period of about 13 years from the time the French and Indian War ended until hostilities really started in earnest in 1775. So he, meaning King George, refused to assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he is utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature. That's a right incontestable to them and formidable only to tyrants. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of the public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. You know, the federal government's pretty good today of fatiguing us into their measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. Think about the chaos at our border. That's what I thought of when I read that. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. Now the feds are allowing everyone in on our dime. Many are dangerous criminals. They get work authorization, schooling, and health care. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their office and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new officers and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Think IRS, EPA, USDA, any other three-letter agency. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislators. Now, we're used to a standing army. We've had it all our life, but in those days, that was an affront to the people. That was seen as a threat to their liberty. We may need to reconsider that, by the way. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to the acts of pretended legislation. Think about the goals that are now pushed by the UN and other international bodies that different administrations have pushed over the years, some without treaties. That's what that really made me think about. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. Now we house illegal aliens, though not in our homes, but we still pay the bill. For protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So now when it says for protecting them, he's talking about acts of parliament there. And I thought about the agent that murdered Ashley Babbitt on January 6, 2021 when I read that. That guy actually got an award, by the way. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. While we do have representation today, we do have little say on how our tax dollars are spent or wasted, both at home and abroad. For depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. Kind of thought about the January 6 defendants on that one, at least some of them. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in neighboring provinces, establishing therein an arbitrary government, enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for inducing the same abuses and absolute rule into the colonies. And that's a reference to what they did in Boston. Basically, the military took over Boston and the civilian leadership was just kicked aside. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. When I read that, I thought about the results of a lot of the judicial activism, especially in the last century. For suspending our own legislators and declaring themselves invested with powers to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Think about all the federal agencies and the power they have been given or allowed to take. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. War has pretty much all been declared on people with traditional values that believe in the Constitution today. Look at how the FBI targets parents speaking out against perversion in the schools. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. As for destroying lives, think about the COVID lockdowns and think about the government's war on fossil fuels and the insane spending it has caused extreme inflation. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign agents and mercenaries to complete the works of death, dissolution, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. They refuse to secure our border today. They allow illegal aliens to wreak havoc on our citizens. Who knows who is actually in our country that may be a foreign agent waiting to inflict mass casualties on U.S. citizens. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Nothing happens today when the left riots, kills, and destroys. They get a pass. The founders had tried to have their rights restored peacefully. Finally, in self-defense, they resorted to arms beginning in 1775 with the shot heard around the world at Lexington and Concord. That was April 19th, 1775. But even in July of 1775, and that was also after Bunker Hill, by the way, the colonies made one last attempt with an olive branch petition stating that the colonies desire not to separate, but to have peace while also having their rights respected. King George promptly rejected their petition, so the declaration was passed. Battles were fought, and finally there was a surrender by the British in Yorktown in 1781. It would be 1783 before the war formally ended with the Treaty of Paris. I would argue that the tyranny we live under today equals, if not exceeds, that which under the founding generation lived. With the technology of today, the possibility of even more tyrannical government is certainly a legitimate concern. Fortunately, the founders also left us with a Constitution that recognizes our God-given right to personal self-defense as well as collective self-defense against a tyrannical federal government. Obviously, I'm referring to the Second Amendment, which says, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But they also gave us the 10th Amendment, which states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." The founders utilized all the political tools at their disposal at the time to attempt to secure their rights. When that failed, they resorted to arms and then finally separated, which only became effective by winning the war. It does not appear to me that we have made full use of the constitutional protections afforded by the 10th Amendment. While there have been some 10th Amendment lawsuits brought against the federal government by the states with some success, states on the whole, certainly including ours, can do more to protect the rights of their citizens from federal overreach, as well as restore the boundaries between state and federal power established by the Constitution. By the way, our legislators take an oath to do that. They take an oath to uphold the Constitution. All of it includes the 10th Amendment. But that will not happen unless we, the people, demand it. So this 4th of July, remember the sacrifices made to give us this country, and honor those sacrifices by making sure our children and grandchildren know the story of our founding. But more importantly, insist that all elected officials acknowledge, respect, and defend the established boundaries of power between the state and federal government and the U.S. Constitution. For more information on this issue, go to tncss.weebly.com. We can't restore those boundaries and our rights overnight, but we have to start now. D.C. will not fix D.C. Have a great 4th of July. And we have as our guest tonight, Cathy Hinners. She is the author of The Muslim Brotherhood, Threat in Our Backyard. She is an occasional host on 99.7 in Nashville. And she has a blog, dailyrollcall.com, a very informative blog. And she's also done some podcasts on Daily Roll Call as well. And glad to have her tonight. And welcome to the show, Cathy Hinners.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Nice to be here. You know, it's been a while since we've discussed the Islamic issue, specifically here in Tennessee. And I know that Americans, including Tennesseans, are undoubtedly overwhelmed with so many controversial issues in the news. However, it hasn't stopped. The Islamists have not stopped their goal of infiltrating and coming from within. And so I've put together some incidents in current organizations and their affiliations that are located here in Tennessee that are still going strong and still have influence in our political realm. And so I thought we would just get into discussing very quickly who the three main groups are that fall under a bigger umbrella. You know, we have talked about this extensively before, but kind of a refresher for people. There's a group in Nashville that's called AMAC, the American Muslim Advisory Council. They are going to serve as our local umbrella over three organizations that I want to just touch base about tonight. First one is the Islamic Society of North America, the Muslim Student Association, and CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, also known as Hamas. So for those that haven't really paid attention years ago, there was a manifesto that was discovered and became part of evidence in a trial in Texas several years ago. And why that's important is because they were found to be guilty. They were co-conspirators. There were several co-conspirators who to this day have stepped foot in our state. But I think it's important to know that one of the most telling and troubling things that came out of this manifesto that was evidence is something called understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. And I won't read the whole thing, but I think the most chilling thing is the Ikhwan, or the Brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands, in the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. I find that very, very telling. The head of CARE, who has come and met with different people in the Murfreesboro Mosque, had said at one point, Islam isn't in America to be equal to any other faith, but to be dominant. So that being said... You
mean they're not just all here to get along?
Oh, no.
They don't want to just go to mosque on Friday and let us go to mosque on, or let us go to church on Sunday?
Yeah, that is the picture that's painted, Dave, by so many of our local, Islamists. And so, let me just go back to and say that this isn't anti-Muslim. This is something that is kind of being pursued and promoted by anti-Americans, I would say, and certainly anti-Christians. And
Okay.
those are Islamists, and that's why we call them Islamists. But it isn't about hating Muslims. It's about preserving our country and our constitution and our culture and way of life. Back a few months ago, what I thought was really interesting is Belmont University, which is a Christian university, had invited someone from the Crescent Project.
Oh,
Crescent
yep.
Project is a nonprofit that tries to build bridges between Christians and Muslims. And so it's a very good, very large organization. And they had the Christian Student Association at Belmont had invited someone from the Crescent Project to speak in reference to understanding, what was happening with Christian values and things like that. And so a head of the Muslim Student Association on Belmont University, and the number one question is, why does a Christian university have Muslim extremists, and I will call them extremists?
Yeah.
Why are they allowed to be on campus, and why they are allowed to influence the current president, Greg Jones, to ask that guest to be removed and for that particular event to be canceled?
Okay, let me say something on that real quick, Kathy. Just as the Crescent Project, because I actually had them come out and speak to our group in Stewart County years ago, just so everybody understands. The guy that leads it is a Christian, and a lot of the people involved with it were former Muslims who converted to Christianity. They have to hide from their families for the most part. They're literally in fear for their lives because, as you know, if you leave Islam, that you signed your death warrant with a lot of them. And so that's the Crescent Project. So they're invited to Belmont, a Christian school, and a Muslim student organization, which shouldn't even be in a Christian school, complained, and the Crescent Project, the people were uninvited.
Yes, and for future guests to go to Belmont, they demanded that a set of guidelines that they would approve the speakers. So good thing it's not me and Bill Warner and John Guandolo trying to get in, as you remember from Trevecca University.
Yeah.
Another Christian place. But so now there's a set of guidelines apparently that the president has okayed, so that the Muslims can view who would be invited in this context to speak at Belmont. And I think if you're a parent that's paying good tuition for Belmont, I think that, phone calls to this president or just, not sending your kid there, because it was based on Christian values, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have Islamic schools everywhere across America. So if you don't want your children to learn about Christianity, don't go there. And so I found that was kind of disturbing. But even the fact that they have the Muslim Student Association, which, by the way, is the number 2 listed organization in the Muslim Brotherhood, the most important student organization throughout this country. There's over 600 chapters, and there are several. There's one at Vanderbilt, Belmont, Trevecca. The list goes on, MTSU and whatnot. So people need to pay attention. And when you look under student organizations, it isn't there. You have to go to what's called the Bruin link. And that's where you'll find information on the Muslim Student Association, which I thought was also kind of interesting. So that is, kind of touching base on the Muslim Student Organization, which ranks the number 2 group under the Muslim Brotherhood here in America. Muslim Brotherhood is not a good organization. And so for people, when they hear that Muslim Brotherhood, it's also known as the Ikhwan, they are not here for any other reason than to continue to infiltrate and indoctrinate. And they're very successful. And we haven't been talking about them, but really it's time, because they just elected a federal judge that's an Islamist. So they're making gains here. So Let's see, I think the other group, and I'll touch base on that, the Islamic Society of North America. There's a woman that's going to be running again for the Nashville City Council. She's a councilwoman at large. Her name is Zulfat Swara. She also is a member of the larger umbrella group that I first spoke about, the American Muslim Advisory Council here in Nashville. And she has some serious issues here that I think people should probably be aware of before they vote for her. Very nice woman. She's very personable. She's very charismatic, but she's very dangerous. And she has accepted an award for the second organization that's here. It's called the Islamic Society of North America. They are the largest Muslim Brotherhood group in America, and they're out of Wayne, New Jersey, and also somewhere in Indiana. So, that group, again, is funded and operated solely by Muslim Brotherhood. Ms. Sawara loves to talk about her royalty family back in Nigeria. She has made recently a visit to Nigeria, in where we see her waving her Nigerian flag. But she also has associated herself with several anti-American and Jew haters here in our country. And she has no problem promoting herself and taking stances with people like Rashida Tlaib, who Rashida Tlaib has come out against American Jews. She is very anti-Christian. She's very anti-America.
Yep.
And we know that Ms. Sawara has met with her on several occasions.
She's
Did you
part
have
of
a
the
question
squad.
about her or a
Well,
comment,
she's one of the squad members, and in fact, isn't Miss at large? I mean, what's Miss? Isn't she pretty much linked to all of what we know as the squad?
Yes, yes. I mean, and we also have pictures of her with Ilhan Omar,
Right.
the woman from Somalia, our congresswoman from Somalia, that has spoken outright about CARE, and she refers to September 11th as some people did something.
Yeah.
Which I think, yes, which I think most Americans were probably offended by.
Yeah.
But she associates with CARE on a regular basis. And then this would be Linda Sarsour, a Palestinian, absolutely rabid Jew hater, and very dangerous, and has made several trips to Tennessee to meet with members of AMAC.
Yep.
The head executive director of AMAC is Sabina Moyhuden. She likes to come off as the prim and proper Bangladeshi Muslim that loves America. She also is very dangerous. And I also heard her call me a white supremacist in a video, a Zoom call she was doing that I just happened to find. And I thought, white supremacist, that's something I've never been called before. So, I guess that was kind of interesting.
Well, that means you must have disagreed with her on
Zulfat,
something. Because remember, if you disagree with them on something, then you're obviously a racist or a white supremacist. That's a given. And people need to understand the Islamists in this country and in this state and the left are working together, have been, and they will continue to do so against us.
Oh yeah, Biden has, he has just embraced the Islamists.
Yep.
A lot of those pictures that were just shown were taken back in, I think it was March or April at Iftar, which is, the kind of like a huge holiday for Muslims. And that was all done in Washington, D.C. She was invited to attend this event in Washington. So Biden is doing what Obama did.
Right.
He's embracing them and just kind of giving them run of, whatever they wish to do. So what's really sad, though, is when you look at her flying the Nigerian flag, I wasn't able to get them to Kevin in time, but I had written an article about her when she first ran for councilwoman a couple of years ago. And every picture that she was in, she had the American flag upside down on it was on a stick. The flag was on a stick and, hitting the ground. And it was very, very disrespectful. But here she is, waving her own flag of her own country. But I think the worst thing is that she likes to promote her love for diversity and her love for America and Christians, and her interfaith, agenda. But yet we know that she is not talking about the Nigerian Christians that are being murdered on a regular basis. And right now in 2023, we know that there's been over 1,000 Christians killed just since the beginning of this year. So, I mean, some of the numbers are just staggering. Since 2009, there's been 52,000 Nigerian Christians murdered. And in that same time period, 18,000 Christian churches have been burned and schools were set, on fire. So she has nothing to say about that, but yet she's willing to wave the flag and show pictures of her with her royalty family. So I just think that those are some things that people need to consider, especially members of the Jewish community here in Nashville. She is hanging with Jew haters, and Linda Sarsour and Rashida Tlaib. They are anti-American, and they just really, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, instead of being what this country, really stands for. So,
well, they're anti-Christian as well.
Those are kind of a few of the people that. Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're anti-Jew, they're anti-Christian, they're anti-anything that's not Muslim.
Yeah, and that's what people aren't paying attention. There's something that another gentleman runs out of Nashville. It's the Faith and Culture Center, and they promote something called a seat at the table, where Muslims and Christians and Jews all get together. Well, I think what people dismiss, because it's easier to get along than it is to question their radical opponent in them. But, you can't love Christians and Jews when you represent or when you stand with the Rashida Tlaibs and the Linda Sarsours. And so I think those are things that people need to question them on and basically expose them and say, explain yourself why this is happening. So it's something that people just choose to avoid. And so if we continue to avoid this, they're making great gains. You don't hear them speaking out against the transgender movement. So where do they stand on that? It's all about not being victims for them. So they would rather just be quiet about some of the controversial issues. And if you've heard of any of them speaking out against the transgender movement right now, I'd be very surprised, because none of them are talking about it. Some of the imams across the country have, kind of almost stuck up for them, but certainly they're not talking about the wrongs of that. And their religion, I mean, they throw off homosexuals off of rooftops in Iran, so, and the Quran is very clear about homosexuality. So I'm sure it's the same about transgenderism, which is a form of homosexuality eventually. But they're just not public about it.
It's a form of insanity for sure. It's a form of insanity and a form of, I would say, I think it's demonic. I think the whole transgender thing is just insane and evil.
It's totally evil. I mean, it's really kind of sick, But and then, Dave, the one other thing I wanted to mention, we had talked about briefly, were the fact that we know that at least a year and a half ago, Nashville accepted over 600 Afghanis that had come over after the chaotic withdrawal that happened, the withdrawal of our troops, August of 2021.
Yeah.
So AMAC, again, the American Muslim Advisory Council, has opened their arms, asking for donations and put out a list of things that the Afghanis would need. But the interesting part is that we know from the National Counterterrorism Center that a lot of the, a vast number of Afghan refugees that came into our country were unvetted. And that's very, very serious.
Were any of them vetted? I doubt any of them were vetted.
You know what? They're saying that there was a portion And when we say vetted, we're talking about information that would give what's called a derogatory information, which basically is any information that would be potentially danger. This person might be a dangerous person, or unfavorable fitness, or axis of determination, something like that. But we know their vetting process, the DoD vetting process, and basically the Homeland Security's vetting process on refugees in general,
Right.
sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no other term for it. You know, so here we have several hundred Afghanis that have come into Nashville. The Nashville Islamic community has opened their arms to them, not saying that they're terrorists, but where were they in the vetting process? Did they go through the medical? Did they go through the biometric? Did they go through the background? And so we don't know where they are. You know, we don't know what they're doing. They were in Tennessee. Are they still here in the Nashville area? Did they go to other counties? This is what's wrong with the way we take refugees.
Yeah.
Especially, we're going to talk about Catholic Charities another time, but
Well, and who's to say that we don't have more than that 600 now? Who's to say that we don't have more than 600 now?
And
if you got AMAC welcoming them, we probably have more than that.
Yeah. I would imagine so. You know, I think it was around September 17th, they identified 31 Afghans. Now, they never did say where those 31 were headed, but they know that they had derogatory information and could locate out of those 31, they've only located 3. And you get to the point where you don't even believe, you know, what the DoD is saying. And then at the end of September, it said 1,200 Afghans had left bases in the U.S. without completing any screening at all. So there's no information. Apparently, Military Times, which is where a lot of the information comes from, was told that they would have to fill out a FOIA request and send it to the DoD to find out more information about where they went. So that in itself is kind of disturbing. They're not willing to tell you that. They want you to, you know, put it in writing, and then we know those FOIA requests usually end up in a round basket somewhere.
Right.
You know? So
right.
They're just not willing to tell us. But it's called the National Ground Intelligence Center is one of the first things that these people came in to different bases, and, you know, where'd they go? You know, people all the time say, I heard of airplanes coming in, and we know that the illegals have been on airplanes. And, you know, there's a mix of, obviously, of families, but I think most people can tell you down at the border that it's the majority of people coming in are single men of fighting and, you know,
from different countries, everywhere.
So, yeah. So where do the Afghanis go? If anybody knows, you know, they can certainly let us know. But I thought that was pretty important for people to understand. You know, if you donated, you're enabling, basically.
Right.
You know, if you have unvetted people, we don't know their background.
And
that's very dangerous. So.
People seem to forget, I mean, even though we can't find anything that we can tie directly to AMAC in terms of a terrorist act or anything, but that doesn't mean something like that couldn't happen in Tennessee. We already had Chattanooga. I mean, that's just a few years ago. And if I'm not mistaken,
I think people forget that.
Yeah, that was somebody who was here. I think he was a fairly young guy, I think maybe grew up here or was born here, if I'm not mistaken. But he was a Muslim. Now, I understand that doesn't mean that every Muslim is going to do that, but you got to look at the ideology. You cannot ignore the ideology. It is a political, religious, and social system all at once. So you talk about there being no separation, church and state. There's certainly no separation within Islam. They don't accept that. And look at what the Muslim Brotherhood said their goal was. So people need to take this serious.
You know, I have said to people, because there's so many things, you know, between textbooks and books, you know, banning books in school libraries, and there's just so many issues right now. And, you know, people have always kind of said, well, can you look into this or can you look into that? And I've told them, you need to pick something and focus on it and extensively focus on it and do your best to expose what's happening in that particular area. Yeah. And people have kind of left behind the Islamic issue. I used to get emails a lot and messages a lot about, something happening here, or there was a little store that opened up being run by Muslims, whatever it was that the people were concerned about. And so it kind of, took a deep nosedive. But when we've started looking in, when, us at Daily Roll Call started looking in again at what they're doing and who they are associating with, reassociating with,
Yeah.
those ties are getting stronger, and those connections are getting stronger, and they're bringing them into this country. And so one thing I think people should be asking of a Muslim is if they, believe strictly in Sharia law, if they live by Sharia law, because Sharia law is completely antithetical to our Constitution. And so, their motto, or Sharia says, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet. And so I think, it's the most unifying of all the pillars. And so it's very, very important. But if a Muslim says they're practicing Shahadin, you've got a problem. You've got someone who is not interested in the Constitution or any man-made laws. It is against Sharia to enforce man-made laws. So when you look at police officers that are Muslims, if they believe in Sharia, they're not enforcing American law. And so
They couldn't.
it's a problem. And like I said,
And don't forget
no.
tequila. They can lie, right? I mean, that's allowed to lie to advance the mission.
Yeah, yep, the art of deception. And, like I said earlier, Biden just appointed another Muslim as a federal judge. Well, federal judges are lifetime judges, so that's a problem because she'll see the court in her light, perhaps in her law, rather than American law. So, that's kind of scary, I think. And,
That's very scary.
One other thing for those people that aren't paying attention to the news, and I've become one of them, I'm not watching much of the news anymore, but I did see something interesting that France is on fire. If nobody's paying attention, you've got major cities in France that are under siege by Islamists, radical Islamists. France is burning to the ground. You got Paris, I think it was Paris, Lyon, and Marseille. That still were both having problems today. Police shot and killed a 17-year-old Muslim boy, and they are rioting. They are rioting like crazy. And yesterday, they even tried to lynch a Catholic priest. They're burning Catholic churches, and they tried to lynch him.
They tried to assassinate a mayor's family as well. I don't know if you saw that. They tried to assassinate a mayor's family.
They're out there.
Yeah. Well, and remember all the
I did
problems.
not see that.
Yeah, all the problems we had, or all the problems they had a few years ago. But keep in mind too, they're only like 9% of the population over there, but they are able to wreak havoc and create these no-go zones in these major cities. It wouldn't shock me to see something happen like that in some of our cities. Now, granted, I guess in some of our big cities, we already have no-go zones for other reasons.
Yes.
But, let's look at a place like Dearborn that's predominantly Muslim. Other places that it doesn't take a huge population because they are destructive. And I kind of like the term that I saw used in the paper the other day, and it was by the police in France, and they were referring to them as vermin. I thought that fit pretty well.
Well, that's it. Another article said savagery was occurring everywhere.
Yeah.
But when you take, like you had said, Detroit and certainly Hamburg, I think it's Hamburg up in Michigan as well, their city councils are all Muslim. Yeah. Their lawmakers are becoming all Muslims, and so that Sharia influence is very great. And so that's how it starts. And we say, well, that's up in Michigan. Listen, one of the funniest things, well, it was funny. It's funny now, it wasn't at the time, but after Bill Lee, our own governor, was elected the first time, 10 days after he was inaugurated, we found a picture of him standing with members of AMAT.
Yep.
And so, which included Zulfat, Mar Ali, there it is. And so, these are, they're true Sharia-loving, anti-American, Jew-hating members of a Muslim Brotherhood umbrella group.
Yeah. And if you look,
so, when you have,
sorry, there's a little delay. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when you have a governor who chose to meet with them for whatever reason, that's very telling of what he's setting as precedent for these Islamists to be in his office and talk about influence. That was a major thing.
Yeah.
And so, he's a lame duck right now. He doesn't care. So
Right.
God knows what he's doing.
Well, he actually met with them before he got elected. That was at least their second, if not third meeting. Can we put that picture back up for just a second? So if you look at Bill Lee, you look the lady to the left, the second lady to the left. You know who that is, right, Kathy? You remember the story on her?
Mar Ali?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, she was, she's a Sharia lover, absolutely. And what was she with Bill Haggerty?
Well, when she was,
trying-
during the Haslam administration, Bill Haggerty was the director of economic development. And this was in, I think, 2012. And he appointed her to the Department of Economic Development. And I think she was going to be like head of the international division or whatever. And she's an expert in Sharia compliant finance. So Sharia compliant finance means that money and funding, that is compliant with Sharia law. Well, she was an expert. Now, of course, they said, well, that had nothing to do with why we hired her. But the fact that they would hire her, and understand her dad is well known and prominent in the state as a doctor, and I think he served in the Tennessee Guard. But he's got a real sketchy past too. We could probably do a whole program on his involvement with the Jerusalem Fund, okay? But so here's just something that just as a reminder, and I'll jog your memory a little bit, but so I think Bill Haggerty actually appointed her. It was during the Haslam administration. Well, once a lot of us found out that he had appointed her, we made a lot of noise about it. We were really irritated. Matter of fact, you had like 16 different GOP county parties sign a letter to Bill Haslam protesting her appointment. Of course, he ignored us. Well, Haggerty,
yeah, right.
who appointed her, he went on to defend her. And essentially, if you remember back when Hillary Clinton called all the Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, those are not the same words that Haggerty used to describe all of us who had issues with her being appointed, but pretty close. And so that's, our current Senator Bill Haggerty. But think about her dad's connections and then her husband's connections to the bank in Qatar and the whole concept of Sharia compliant finance. I mean, we probably need to do a show on that so people understand how serious this is.
And once again, when you look at these individuals as humans and as individuals, they're very nice. They're very polite. They're very caring. I mean, they're good individuals, but it's their agenda and their goals for us that are skewed and are anti-American. And so I think that's what people need to look at. I've often said, because a politician is a nice guy, it doesn't mean he's cut out for that particular position.
Yeah.
We know a lot of those, politicians that are super nice guys, but they really kind of suck at legislating and making policy. And so it's the same with the Islamists. And, we've got so many different things to talk about. We've got we haven't talked about Dover in a long time, the different sites that we know we have out in Dover as far as being, kind of sketchy.
Jamaat al-Fukra.
There's a lot of things.
Used to be watched by the feds.
It's another terrorist organization. Yeah. So, and these are things, like I said, we haven't spoken about in a long time. And I know people are overwhelmed, but I think if you're going to pick something, I think the Christian aspect and the way that eventually Christians will be persecuted continually by Islamists, that's just in their own doctrine. That is in their doctrine. It is in the Quran, it is in the Hadiths, it's in every book. It's in the Traveler of the Reliance. There is classic Islamic law. And so I think people need to start paying attention to their surroundings when it comes to Islamists. Certainly.
Well, and they need to understand the red-green axis, that the far left in this country, they work with the Islamists. I mean, that's not a possibility, that's a fact that they do work with them, because they work together to undermine us, to undermine the culture, to undermine the heritage and traditions of our country. I don't think there's any doubt in that. But there's a lot of things we can talk about. We'll probably do something about the situation there in Dover. I live outside of Dover. I live in Stewart County, and I haven't heard anything recently. But if you look at the history of the group, and granted, that's like one of 20-some camps across the country. And I mean, we've done some other digging, and we can get into that. People should be concerned. People should absolutely be concerned.
We have pictures.
Yeah.
You know, we've got pictures to prove, you know, and I think it's important to let people know that, you know, things that we've spoken about, whether it's in the past or future or tonight, you know, we've got the documentation, we've got the pictures. And I think, you know, their worst enemy is social media, because we use their own social media and their own documents to show what they say and what they do. And so that's, you know, you can't argue when you're looking at someone who's said something on social media and backed it up with pictures. So, you know, CARE has been after us for some time. At one point, they named us the inner circle of Islamophobia, which, you know,
you were the Dirty Dozen. When you say we, you're not.
Yeah.
You were part of you made the Dirty Dozen list by the Southern Poverty, or the Socialist Progressive Lobbyist Corporation. It's Southern Poverty Law Center. You made the Dirty Dozen a few years ago, right?
Yeah, that was a real badge of honor, you know, to be named along with women like, you know, Bridget Gabriel and Laura Ingraham, and, you know, so Claire Lopez. It was quite an honor to be named. I felt I was number 6, but it was only because it was alphabetical. But yeah, they threw our picture and our bio all over the place and said we're anti-Muslim haters, Islamophobics. And, so now I'm a white supremacist that's a millionaire, apparently, from making my money off of Islamophobia. But you know,
you've been hiding that pretty good.
So it's, I know, I know that. But you know, we're back. I just want to say that, you know, it feels good to be back. We'll be doing more articles and more podcasts, dailyrollcall.com. And, you know, it's something that people just need to wake up. I mean, I know there's a lot of issues, but I think this one, to know that our way of life and religion is being subverted, is very important. And I think that people need to start paying attention to that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you said their social media, but their doctrine, you look at their doctrine. And so it doesn't matter how nice they are, how nice they interact with other people. Nice does not equal good. And being nice doesn't mean you don't have an agenda. And they definitely have an agenda.
That's right.
And way too many people, I mean, it goes back to what you said about politicians a minute ago. A lot of them get elected because they're nice. We need smarter voters too, by the way.
Doesn't matter.
Because they elect the nice people, not necessarily the people that actually have any intention of upholding their duty to the Constitution, state and federal. Not somebody who really will stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, is there anything else that you wanted to hit on tonight?
God, we could probably go on forever, but the one thing that I did forget to tell when we talked about Muslim student associations, and I want people to know this, especially because you're paying, you know, for your children's tuition to go to these universities, Belmont, Trevecca, Vanderbilt. The Muslim Brotherhood uses the most powerful tool that they have are their students, and they perform what's called dawah, you know, which is basically the proselytizing of Islam in a good light. And so that is the main reason why you're seeing more and more of these Muslim student organizations kind of popping up on these schools. But if your child goes to Belmont, these are things that you need to really understand and pay attention to. You know, you're paying really good money for Christian speakers and organizations to be left off of campus. So I just wanted to retouch on dawah. And other than that, though, Dave, good to be back. Good to be with you, certainly. And, there's a lot of stuff going on that we're going to start exposing again. So I hope that people pay attention.
Yeah. And your book, can we pop the book back up there? That's a really good book. Hey guys, it's an easy read. It's not really thick, but it's got a lot of information in it. And you really need to read it to know what's going on, get a good overview, because it's real. They're out there. And remember, the people, the groups, the Islamist organizations operating in Tennessee have connections to the national groups that have connections to the international groups. So, and Muslim Brotherhood, unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, the biggest terror financing trial in U.S. history. I said Muslim Brotherhood. CARE was the unindicted co-conspirator, but CARE is the Muslim Brotherhood. They're all part of it. They all flow from that. There's all the Islamic organizations anywhere flow from the Muslim Brotherhood, whether they're fighters overseas or whether they're here in a suit and wiggling their way into power, infiltrating somewhere. They all fall under that. So, but very good book. Also, dailyrollcall.com, Cathy's website. A lot of good information there. It's not all just the Islamist threat. There's stuff about illegal immigration, refugees, you name it. There's different things on there. And she also has some podcasts. I haven't done one of those in a while, but she does have some good podcasts on there. So Cathy, we'll definitely have you back. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
And we'll try to get you within the next maybe 6 weeks or so, somewhere in that time frame, and follow up.
Excellent. Well, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back and great about talking about something that's really, really very important to both of us and certainly those of us at Daily Roll Call and Tennessee Informer. And so, if anybody has questions, they can email me at dailyrollcall.com at gmail.com. And I hope to see you again soon. Dave, thanks very much.
Will do.
I appreciate it. And happy Independence Day.
Absolutely. You have a great one. Take care. I started off the show, of course, with a 4th of July message, and I mentioned if you had interest in finding out how we can go about getting our state officials to stand up more for the Constitution, which has boundaries between us and the federal government, you can go to tncss.weebly.com, and if you sign up for the Substack, that's how we'll communicate with you. That's tnccs.substack.com. Doesn't cost anything. Just want you to sign up, get the newsletter, get informed. Hopefully we'll have some legislation to put forth in the next session. Hope to run Representative Holsey and Senator Bowling's nullification bill again this session. Well, that's all of our show for tonight. Appreciate you tuning in. If you like the show, hit the like button, subscribe. Next week we'll have on, our guest will be Clay Doggett from District 70. Thanks, and have a great 4th of July. See you next week.